And I still remember, I think the turning point came when I read this 3-part series. It was Mike Fay's Mega Transect across the Congo. I really loved his photography at the time. And I remember thinking then that that's what I want to do.
Hello and welcome to deKoder and our podcast, Women in Nature. Women have been in the center of the fight to protect our environment, from indigenous women who preserved traditional ecological knowledge to modern activists who have advocated for sustainability. But it's still a challenge for women environmentalists to be taken as seriously as their male counterparts. In addition to the indigenous women, women have also been scientists, they've been ecologists, they have been writers, photographers, filmmakers, and artists. And yet we don't see enough women in decision-making roles and in policy-making roles. Women who have bucked this trend, made lasting change, and who have been trailblazers and pathfinders have often been labeled difficult women, but they have been difficult for Earth's sake. World-famous primatologist Jane Goodall once said, "It doesn't take much to be considered a difficult woman, and that's why there are so many of us." In this podcast, you will see and you will hear their stories so that we can better understand the interconnectedness between environmental issues and gender, a connection that highlights a more inclusive approach to conservation and sustainability. So today I have with me a fabulous difficult woman, Arati Kumar Rao.
Arati has multiple skills when she advocates for the environment. She's a phenomenal photographer, a storyteller, she's an artist, and she pioneered slow journalism in a big way in India. She's a National Geographic Explorer. She has spent years documenting the effects of environmental degradation across the Indian subcontinent. She's chronicled environment changes and looked at how anthropogenic pressure has really affected livelihoods, has affected cultures, has affected biodiversity. She's been published in National Geographic, she's been published in Emergence magazine, in The Guardian, in the BBC, and she's on the BBC 100 Women's list.
Arati, welcome so much to this podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak to me. So, to start with, your debut novel, Margin Lands, has came out a year ago, and it's done so well, and you've gotten these rave reviews, especially from some superb authors themselves like Amitav Ghosh and Robert McFarlane, and you've gotten great reviews. You've been nominated for a lot of awards, but I know that this has been sort of a culmination of almost years of your efforts in traversing these marginalized landscapes and really listening deeply to communities who live there and looking at all of the challenges and all of what's been ignored when it comes to either rewilding, regenerating, or protecting these landscapes. So what inspired or triggered that movement where you decided, okay, now I'm ready to sit down and write this book?
First of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for thinking of me, Swati, and thanks for that very generous introduction. What got me writing the book, I didn't think that this would be a book, frankly. I was just going about doing the documentation, and it was several years of going back to these places to see how things are changing and what's happening to both the biodiversity and the people that depend upon these rivers, especially the Ganga Brahmaputra river basin. And so I didn't really think much of it as a book or anything. And I must thank Teesta Guha Sarkar, who was with Pan Macmillan at the time. And she came up to me and she said, "Listen, how about a book?" And so that got me thinking. And of course, soon after that, the pandemic hit. So I could go nowhere. So I was also stuck. And that also meant that I could then devote some of the time pulling together some of these stories into the book, and some of my research over the past maybe 8 years, 8, 9 years into the book. And it was interesting because as I reflected back and also then did a little bit more field work when things opened up as well after the pandemic, I realized the echoes of these issues across the subcontinent, that it was not special to one place, that it was not something that was uncommon. Unfortunately, what we're doing to our land is all over the Indian subcontinent and probably all over the world as well. But definitely the Indian subcontinent, which depends so much on the monsoon, on the rivers, on the land itself to sustain so many millions of people. And I think I began to see the enormity of the issue as I began to write. And so yeah, it was a forcing function from the publisher, which I'm forever thankful to her for doing that. But yeah, I think just as it came together, it made me realize how deep the trouble was and how deep the rot was.
What you've done to highlight these spaces is enormous. And that brings me to the question of, because you were in these landscapes and you have been so, how shall I say, open with really being with the communities who know so much about these landscapes and listening to them. I'd be interested to know how much of that, because I've seen this in the field, how many of that were like women, because often when I went into the field, I got a lot of my information from the women, because they seem to be really in touch with the issues. And yet you don't see the women in, even within those spaces, and either in the panchayats or whatever is the local community that makes the decisions, but it's the women who are affected by wetlands disappearing or desertification or even the pandemic, for example. So this kind of disproportionate effect between women who are actually affected and women who can represent those spaces and speak for it is such a massive gap.
Yes, and it's something that I really struggled with, and I had to force myself into places so that I could actually hear the women, because it is so often and so pervasive that it is the man's voice. He's the one who's quick to speak up. Even if I have directed the question at the woman, it's the man who speaks up. And it was quite a struggle to even sift through and get through to women. In fact, one thing I realized is so many of them are not used to being asked for their opinion or for their experience. And so they would just parrot back to me what the man said. And I would be like, no, wait, what do you think? And how is it affecting you? And to get to those answers, I had to sit in the kitchens and while they cooked, wait for their guard to drop, wait for the men to melt into their own spaces, and then the women to come into their own. And it wasn't easy and it wasn't often, you know, especially when it came to places like Rajasthan, where the women are in parda still. I'm so glad that I am a woman and I could actually go talk to them. But then I still realize that it would take many years of sitting with them to be able to really get the full purport of what they have to go through, because they couldn't even understand why I was interested in what they felt or what they thought. And
Yeah,
um, so it's really hard. And this next the project I'm on currently, again, I'm facing the same problem because I'm again finding that the men are quick to speak up. But this time I am doggedly only going to be recording the women. I'm like, so yeah, you can say what you want, but I will come back and speak to the lady whenever I can, because it's so important. The issues they face, and I'm talking now about the migrants who've been pushed out of these degraded landscapes. And the issues that these women face are so markedly different from what the men face in the cities. They're migrants in cities, but again, it's a very different life, even though they're in the same house. And so I
absolutely.
am, yeah, so this time I'm doggedly, kind of laser focused on the women.
Yeah, because the UNDP actually came out with a figure that was quite frightening, and I hope it's not correct, but they said something about how if you look at displaced people from areas because of climate change and environmental degradation, 80% of those who are displaced are women. 80%. So I'm like, wow. I mean, that's very scary, and I sincerely hope that that's not right. But what also a lot of people don't think about is the fact that when women get displaced from what is may not be the safest space for them where they are. Hopefully, they're not in abusive relationships, but still, when they get displaced from what they know as home, the level of vulnerability women face and the level of uncertainty that they face is exponentially much, much higher than a man
Indeed.
coming into an urban space or a city to like work.
Indeed, absolutely. And I think anybody who's been in our cities knows that our cities aren't equipped for this large influx of people. And we have been seeing, it's not just climate change, but also mismanagement of land, resources, water, all of that. And we have been seeing hundreds of millions of people on the move and into, with the bigger towns or the bigger cities. And we're not quite equipped to deal with them. And so the women and often children in tow uh, end up getting the short end of the stick. And it's a very I think we're going to have a problem that we haven't quite foreseen on our hands very soon because we keep um, touting our demographic dividend because we're a young country. But if you look at these migrant children, they're just growing up without an education that's going to equip them for any job at all, without healthcare. The women are without healthcare, without any support system, and they're living in literal, the squalor and having to make ends meet, and it's not conducive to to even their mental health for that matter. It's really crazy. I've been sitting with some of these women in Bangalore where I live, and the stories I hear are horrific, horrific.
Now, just to shift the lens a little, what for you, growing up really, when you were, I don't know, in your pre-teens, teens, did you always envision your life going down this path? Or did it something that happened because of an incident further down the path, or was it something that you've always been inspired by? So maybe you could talk a little bit to that, because I know you also have a master's in physics and you did work in Intel. And so I'm just wondering what the path was, and
Yes,
what
I took the scenic
made you
route
switch to this
home.
full time. Yeah.
Yeah, I took the scenic route home. I do consider my current state as home now, but yes, right from when I can remember, I have wanted to tell stories, and I have wanted to write and shoot. Photography has always been very close to my heart. And we used to get the yellow bordered magazine, the National Geographic's home, growing up in Bombay, and I used to pore over them every month, just wait for the next issue. And I still remember, I think the turning point came when I read this three-part series by Mike Fay, and it was not written by Mike Fay, but it was Mike Fay's mega transect across the Congo, where he walked from one end of the Congo to the other. I really loved his photography at the time. And I remember thinking then that that's what I want to do. I want to walk across landscapes and tell stories of landscapes. And I remember, I think when I graduated from college, from St. Xavier's, Bombay, I had a list of 50 things I wanted to do. And the top one is follow river systems down from the source to the sea, telling stories. So, I think from just when as I was 19, 20, I've wanted to do this. And of course, it was a dream to be a National Geographic Explorer. And I wandered and wandered. Yes, I did a master's in physics, thinking I wanted to be an astrophysicist, then a biophysicist, and all kinds of things. And then wandered some more with doing stuff at Intel and the corporate life. But eventually, I just knew that I had to stop doing what I could do and start doing what I wanted to do, really wanted to do. So that's when I quit Intel and tried to make something of myself as a freelancer.
And that's really the question, isn't it, Arthi? For a lot of women who could be listening in, who might have these dreams but are stuck either in conventional sort of career paths because they think that's the way to go, or it's financial security, or maybe they don't have the kind of support from family or their surroundings for them to be able to break out, really. So, in terms of becoming a freelancer, doing this work, stepping out into this path, which at the time when you did it would have not been the thing that a lot of people, let alone women, were doing a lot of. So, did you have family support? Did you have support from your immediate ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely. And I just go back to your previous question also. I grew up in a family family of environmentalists. My father, he was with the Save the Western Ghats March. He sat with the Narmada Bachao Andolan. He was part of the Silent Valley, push, the march for protecting the Silent Valley, and so on. So I've grown up with these thoughts and these sentiments, and so it's very deeply ingrained in me. It's not apart from me at all. It was not a job or a choice. It was just very natural when I quit Intel. So that, yes, but you bring up such a good point, because in India, being a freelancer and being a media person does not necessarily mean that you can pay the bills, unfortunately, especially doing the kind of work I do, which is long form, slow, over time, over places. You have to travel quite a bit to be able to reach some of these places. And I ended up paying out of pocket for a large amount of this time. Writing for grants, you hardly get these grants because unfortunately everybody wants something on climate change, and this was not technically climate change. I was looking at what we are doing to the land, and so um, it was hard getting grants until, of course, one or two grants really set me off, and I thank some of those, like the third pole and so on, who were really, really very instrumental in supporting this kind of work. And so it definitely comes down to having good family support, someone to fall back upon, and I had that. um, and and also savings from my corporate life. So there was, I took personal loans, people who were willing to give me that money, and then I would buy equipment and stuff like that, and then over time paid back. So it's definitely not a path you want to choose if you want to be a millionaire, or if you want to buy a Merc or an Audi or something like that. It,
Yeah.
there's absolutely no way forward that way.
No.
But
Yeah.
it's a labor of love kind of work. And yes, you have to do things like, as a photographer, I do other things to sustain myself and to pay the bills and so on. You have to do that. You have to moonlight and so on. So that's that. But it's extremely rewarding because you are following a lodestar which is within you, and it's something that needs to be done. And I really, really hope people listening start telling more stories about the land, because I think people who are in those spaces, you know if they start telling stories, documenting the changes that are coming to the spaces they're in, we need that, because there's nothing like that. When you know where you've come from, you know how you got there, you know the mistakes that were made, and it kind of points the way forward. And so the more people who are documenting the changes that are coming to their spaces, and it could be an urban neighborhood in Bangalore, it could be a village just outside, it could be anything. You don't have to travel far for this, really. I chose the Ganga Brahmaputra basin for a very specific reason, because I wanted to see the effect of dams on the land. So it was a very specific reason that I went there. But just getting out, put on a pair of walking shoes, get out into your neighborhood. And unfortunately, we have so many issues with the way our cities are growing, and also so much opportunity to change stuff, and to be a force for making it right before it gets too far down the path, especially the smaller cities. That I think that would be, we need that groundswell of storytellers about the land, if we want it to be heard, to it to become part of the psyche, for environmentalist to not be a bad word, environment to not be an obstacle, you know, because we're seeing the fallout of that kind of thinking in our cities now. You know, the very fact that
Oh,
environment has been
completely.
treated as an obstacle, and you know, you flouted the environmental rules to do certain things, and then I mean, I live in a place in Bangalore which gets flooded with, you know, hardly any rain. Why? Because we've built on wetlands, and you know, that's
Yeah.
happening even in Chennai and so on. So um,
Yeah.
telling these stories is important, documenting changes is important. And so if you are a storyteller, or if you want to be a storyteller, I think it's a vital time right now to just take up the pen and the camera. And everybody has a camera these days. You don't even need as fancy,
Yeah, with the
you know,
phone.
yeah,
Exactly.
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
And
sound on the phone
also,
and everything.
but now with the kind of access we have and the kind of
Yeah.
knowledge and the easy kind of
Yes.
tech, the platforms,
Yeah.
all of it, I really feel like it's easier in a way to tell these stories or to find a platform on which to tell these stories. But coming back to that, in India, still, I still feel if you want to do this professionally as a freelancer and you really want to carry it and have a body of work, it's still an enormously uphill task in some ways because there isn't an established ecosystem which allows you to have this the platforms on which to do it. So I don't understand how environmentalism got this tag of either being anti-national or being anti-development when all
Right.
we're saying is people should have the right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and eat
Yeah.
relatively healthy food.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I kind of harp on this thing which Aldo Leopold said in 1949. It was so prescient. Civilization has been so cluttered this man-earth relationship with gadgets and middlemen, that environment that the awareness of it is growing dim. We imagine that industry is what supports us, forgetting what supports industry.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the land, it is the environment, right? And
Yeah.
this was in 1949, and it is so true today. And absolutely, you know, while there are a few platforms, like you said, Round Glass and you know, Nature and Focus and places like that, which are happy to publish stuff, we we live in this wonderful age of Instagram and all of that too. We are all our own publishers in so many ways, and so many people who are looking for content are scouting these platforms as well. So your portfolio lives on Instagram if you so choose, and if you're not putting selfies there, if you know, if you do, you use it for a medium of your work, it can be very powerful because there are people who are on it, who have the means to then push it out, um, and who have wide audiences. You can gather your own audience of people, and then, you know, build a movement that way. So we can be our own publishers, and there are so many editors also who are are looking for people who can write and shoot and do both sometimes, and so on these at you know in these on these platforms. So it's a wonderful time to be alive as a storyteller in that sense. That said, the appetite for sustained storytelling about a topic, you know, almost like beat journalism, but kind of, you know, really keeping at it and telling the story over time, because that's what allows you to connect dots, you know, walk it back into history, walk it forward, see what, you know, what's happening. That appetite is still lacking. And we need that appetite. And we need people who'll fund such storytelling, because that storytelling involves a lot of time, a lot of resources. But without this kind of storytelling, you're going to be getting just snapshots, or you're going to get parachute journalism, none of which tell the story, none of which help you see the big picture. They're almost reporting on the symptoms, not on the problem. While we need storytelling about the problem itself, you know, we need to be able to identify the problem, pin the not blame, but how we got there. We need to really figure out how we got there, and so that we can find a way forward. So that takes time, and that takes resources, and that is slow, because it's not something you can do in one trip to a place, not normally. And so, yes, we need people who can fund such work. And we do have a few philanthropists who've been wonderful in doing such work, but such funding work. But we need more, and we need more resources behind that, because we're heading down a very slippery slope of completely sidelining the environment, when really that is the only thing that'll sustain us, right? With glaciers retreating and so on, and we are a subcontinent that depends hugely on our rivers. And if we are going to sully those rivers, and the water itself is going to be going away in many ways, and we're going to do strange things to the basins, which are not going to help
Yeah.
sustain these rivers, we're going to be in so much trouble down the road. So we need that kind of sustained storytelling, and we need to somehow foster the appetite for that kind of storytelling.
No, for sure. So, you've really been a proponent of this slow journalism and slow storytelling, and you've kind of like really traveled, spent time, gathered the information, put it together. So, my question now would be really, as a woman in these spaces, Arti, have you ever, before you set out, your first big, that's what brought you to my attention years ago was when you did the Brahmaputra journey and your writings on that and everything, which was just marvelous. So, really, as a woman, when you step out into these spaces, it means a lot of the times you're traveling alone. Maybe you have one person or someone else with you.
No.
These are unknown spaces that are,
Yeah.
okay, on your own. And then, these are unknown spaces. These aren't established spaces where you have a rest house always, or a guest house, or a hotel, or
Yes.
whatever have you.
Yeah.
So, as a woman in these spaces, because often that is also the pushback, and why we don't see too many women in these spaces is simply because of this. It's that the fact that it just feels like a very vulnerable space into which to enter as a woman to do this work. So, what have you seen as challenges in this space?
I think I've been lucky. I've been very lucky, because I have found that, especially in rural parts of the Indian subcontinent where I've worked, whether it's Assam, whether it's Arunachal Pradesh, whether it is Bengal, North Bengal, or Bihar, anywhere, any of these places, it's been people kind of adopt you, in the sense that they're like, okay, you've come to our village, we're going to kind of take care of you, and show you around and so on. So I think I've been lucky. I know that, of course, um, you don't I've tried not to like go out at night and things like that alone in places that I'm not familiar with. But also, I realize that I'm standing on the shoulders of people who've come before me, like wildlife biologists who are often working in very remote areas, women wildlife biologists in very remote areas, and amazing. The kinds of work they do, their stories are just, so inspiring. Um, Wherever I have gone, also, Swati, I think one of the things that has helped is that I have found people who are working in these places, so that I'm not going in completely cold. I am meeting, whether they're activists, or whether they're researchers, or whether they're social workers, people who have knowledge of the spaces and the people, and what to look out for, what to do, and so on. I've been very lucky to be guided by these people who are locals there. And so that, in that sense, it has also, again, been they teach you so much. they teach you so much, right? Especially when they're researchers and activists who've worked there for years. You really get a perspective, and you're not getting a naive perspective. If I were to go alone, while it's great to see something from an outside point of view, I might just see something very shallow. But working with these people who've been there in those landscapes, I do get a sense of the history of how, of the dynamics of both the biodiversity with the locals, the livelihood, and the rivers, things like that, right? So that's again been very helpful. Yeah, I think the only time that I've felt unsafe or been worried a little bit for my safety has been in the city, in Bangalore. So it's been interesting and very, I think, India, um, especially India, but also Bangladesh, where I work quite a bit. Uh, there has been just this amazing camaraderie, this welcome, because everybody wants their story to be heard. And maybe not too many people get there to hear their stories. So these people are very eager to help and to tell you what they know and what their experience has been. So I've been very fortunate, and it's all, thanks to these people in the rural areas.
And Arthi, your photography and your art, both of which are pretty extraordinary. And normally you find people who are photographers and then you find people who are artists. Not that one won't dabble in the other, but you're like, you could be tomorrow a photographer professionally if you wanted to, and you could totally be an artist professionally if you wanted to. Were both these skills something that was self-taught? And how did it come about? Was it something that you always did from when you were a child, especially the art? Because your recent post, which you did with the children as a tribute to the children of Palestine, I mean, it was extraordinarily evocative and beautiful, and you kind of animated it as well in the way that you had done it, which was just absolutely magnificent. So, was it like something that you taught yourself to do? Did you, I don't know, have
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
trained?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, no, no. It's all self-taught, and I'm always doing things that take me away from the things that I need to do, the deadlines that I need to need to meet. I'm always doing things. Um, it's. I think very early on, I realized that if you want to tell a story well, you need to be able to use as many tools as you can, because some parts of the story are better told through photographs. Some parts are better told through writing, because some of these complex issues and nuanced issues need expositions. You need to tell, you need to explain things, and then some things can be shown so easily with art because you've not been able to take a photograph or something like that. So I've kind of, I'm still teaching myself. Just before I came online, I was trying to paint a dog. I've never painted a dog before, so I was trying to teach myself to paint a dog. So yeah, so things like that. But I'm constantly doing these kinds of things. I just love learning. I think I'm one of those lifelong learner types, and so I'll be a forever pauper too. I think because of that.
I'm not talking about just sketches or nice pictures that some people can draw technically. I'm talking about you being a real artist. I mean, you're exhibited. You can be out there with with any on that level of professional art level. So that's what where did that come from, or when did you realize
You're
that you
so
had a
generous,
certain
Swati.
innate talent?
Very generous of you. Thank you so much. I don't consider. So the funny thing is, I have a feeling the photographers consider me a writer. The writers consider me a photographer. The artists consider me a writer and a photographer. I don't think I really belong neatly in any of these boxes, and I'm not a professional in any of these any of these particular genres. But um, I think I just, like you said, and anybody who tells me, oh, I can't draw to save my life, I'm like, no, you just haven't tried hard enough. And I think that's all it is. I think everyone, if they put in the hours, but also just keep upskilling themselves in some way or the other, in some, genre or the other, you can get to a fairly good level of proficiency, and then it becomes a passion, and then you take it forward, and then it kind of feeds on itself, and you get good at it. So yeah, I think it's just that, and anybody can do this, I think, because if you are observant, I think it comes down to that. If you teach yourself to be observant, pay attention, that's the basic. You can't be a good photographer if you're not observant. You can't be a good writer if you're not observant. You definitely can't be a good artist if you're not observant. So it just comes down to that. I think the curiosity, the open-mindedness, and with all your senses firing, if you go out into the world, I think you can tell your stories pretty well, and you can, then just it's just a question of upskilling yourself in something to be able to get there. It's not rocket science.
Anything that you draw is political as well, and not in from a sense of satirical politics, really from a metaphorical sense of politics. Like it has a depth of a story behind that image, and it's quite political. And that brings me to the other point, which is you're one of the few people I know who've always quite strongly expressed yourself. You don't kind of like pull your punches in a sense, not in a mean kind of way that everybody is just standing up there and moaning and complaining about stuff that's happening around you. That's not what I mean. I mean, as in you stand firm in what you've seen, what you've learned, what you've observed in these spaces that you've gone into, write your stories, and then you haven't pulled any punches when you've called a spade a spade. And you've always been vocal about that as well. So that is another thing, for women. Where did that strength come from? And B, have you felt any pushback on that simply because you're a woman, or been mansplained over or talked over for having that kind of strong opinion?
Yes. So where it comes from is from my father, because way back in the 80s, I remember, and I kind of mentioned this in the book as well. I'm cowering behind a curtain listening to this raucous debate between my father and my uncle, who was with the World Bank, on the merits and demerits of large dams. My father never pulled any punches. He knew what he believed in, and he was spot on all those decades ago, right? Way ahead of his time. He worked in a thermal power plant, but he wanted to build a biogas plant because he thought that renewable energy was the way to go, and renewable energy not being hydropower. So he had a very clear thing about it. So I saw that, and I saw the conviction in him. And I realized that if you see something, and that's the thing, right? It's not an opinion. When I go into these places, I actually see what we have done to the land, right? I see what has happened to the people, what has happened to the biodiversity. It's happened. There's no two ways about it. So it's not an opinion. This is what it is. And so that, I think, itself gave me the strength. When I know the people's stories, I know the stories of what's happened to this land. Um, it's given me the strength to then speak up for it. And I think Wendell Berry's quote is really, it's been my lodestar, where he says, "What I stand for is what I stand on," which is exactly what it is, right? It's not about a government, it's not against a government. No government actually has been good for our environment or has done the
Yeah.
right thing. And it's just like I'm equal opportunity against, I'm going to I'm going to diss everyone who stands against the land. And so there's that conviction, when you're standing up for the land and you're seeing what's happening to the land. If somebody tells you, no, this dam is good for the land, you can point to exactly what has happened upstream, downstream, at the place itself. And there's just so much destruction that it's I mean, you making an argument for it is clearly vested interest, right? So, and no, I'm just taking dam as an example. It could be anything, right? It could even be a seawall in Kerala, for that matter. Everything.
Yeah.
And so, when you see what it does, and you know that good science is there, which tells you that this won't work or this shouldn't be done, but you doggedly don't listen to that and you doggedly go behind something else because of various reasons, um, it's silly. It's really silly. And so that conviction, I think, is just earlier, and you're absolutely right. I was mansplained. I live in a place where I'm surrounded by people who could be characterized as tech bros, you know, technology will solve everything, kind of people. Um, and also people who are quite disconnected from the land. I don't think they would be able to tell you how the water got here, into Bangalore. They really don't know what's happening. It's a bubble, right? And so there's been a lot of mansplaining in these spaces, and a lot of saying that, oh, you're a tree hugger, dismiss. I remember reading Spillover. Have you read Spillover? Right, by Kwamen. Fabulous book about
Absolutely.
zoonoses, right? And I'm reading
Scary
that.
because I read it before the pandemic, and when the
Exactly,
pandemic
me
hit, I
too.
was like, oh my God.
Exactly. I read it in
Yeah.
2016 or 2015. And when I'm reading it, I am telling these same people who are in, these circles about it. And they're like, oh, come on, you're just, this is scaremongering and, oh, come on, everything, this, that, and the other. And then the pandemic happens. And now those very same people are coming to me and saying, have you read Spillover? I'm like, what do you think I was reading 5 years ago? You know?
I'm talking to
So
you about it.
exactly. This
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
argument we've
absolutely.
already had. So anyway, so
But do
yeah,
you
so
feel
there's
that this is, but so what I'm trying to like, so do you feel that if, and it could be that it isn't, and this could happen to anybody, but do you feel sometimes the pushback is just harder if you're a woman as opposed to if you're a man? And if you're a woman, it's just immediately like you're either being dramatic or hysterical or just, yeah, as you said, bunny hugging and tree hugging and all of it. And the dismissal is almost instant or you're talked over very quickly. So I was wondering if you'd have that experience as well.
yeah, it's interesting because now when people are coming around and the same things are being said by the men, it's received far more uh, easily. It goes down far more easily to with people, and they are quoted far more than me or anybody else
Women
who
are.
was saying it a long time before was is quoted. Uh, so yes, I think there's that. There's also not just woman, but the color of the skin matters. There are these levels, there are these hierarchies. If you are a brown woman and saying something versus if you're a white woman and saying something, or if you're a brown woman in America or the West saying something, white woman in the West saying something, and then you come to the men. So
Yeah.
there are
And
all
it
these
just stacks
hierarchies,
up.
right? Yeah. And so
Yeah. And then we
but I
wonder
think
why we don't hear Indigenous women voices. Like, where in this hierarchy would that even begin to be a platform in
quite
which they
so.
could step in and speak?
Quite so. I remember going to COP15, Swati, sorry, COP21 in 2015 in Paris, and being shocked that the indigenous people who had the stories we need for the hour, we really need to hear how they treat the land and what survival techniques they have. They're relegated to something called the green tent, whereas all the important conversations happened in the blue tent. And who was there in the blue tent? There were these businesses, which of course have a vested interest in keeping the thing going. Anyway, but
Yeah,
the thing is,
status quo
yes, so
going.
yeah, so that whole indigenous body of knowledge is doubted, is dismissed, is it's much harder. So yeah,
Oh,
so there itself
yeah,
there's so
it's
yeah,
been a generational epistemicide. I mean, we've lost so much because
so
not
much.
only has there been an epistemicide of the knowledge where we've just lost and dismissed all of this knowledge, we've also separated science from indigenous wisdom and called indigenous wisdom superstition or myth or any whatever it is that we will call it to push it aside. And science has become, the way of explaining things. A lot of science that we know today happened because people went into spaces where indigenous people helped them gather the information and the knowledge and never got acknowledged for it. But coming back to being a woman and being talked over and often, your voice not being seen as important as a man's, I have a two-part question here. One is, you've travel a lot. You've been to conferences and you're on panels and you're in discussion spaces and all of it. When is the last time you were in a space where it was an all women's panel and you weren't just the token woman on a panel? Because even now in science conferences, in conservation spaces, climate change, what have you, um, they're still filling the spaces with men, and they seem to struggle to find women.
Yeah. Um, I think no, I think some of the places that I've been in, I hope I haven't been the token woman. I hope there's been a reason why they've called me. But yes, there have been some where I am the only woman, but there have been many in which we have more women than men in those panels. And clearly, the perspectives that the women bring has been interesting. That said, though, Swati, one thing that I have found very often, which has upset me quite a lot at times, is that this whole thing. Sometimes I feel that there are many women who speak like men, who also talk over the indigenous person, who also talk over the lived experience, because they have a certain um, certification or a degree or something like that. So I feel sometimes that this is a mindset that is not only gender related. It is also gender related. It does have a man woman dichotomy kind of thing, but it's not just that. There are many women who seem to also be very happy to behave in that almost patriarchal, misogynistic manner. And so I've seen that way too often and quite troublingly. And I've also, on this other side, seen men who have been amazingly empathetic, beautiful listeners, who have gone into spaces. Like I must say, have you read Yuvan Aves, Intertidal? Yeah. What a
Intertidal,
wonderful
yeah,
guy, right? Yeah. And then my own mentor, Prem Panikar, for example, Paul Salopek. I've had
yeah,
three amazing mentors,
yeah.
all men, and each one of them I find is extremely different, not the typical, they don't fit the mold of the typical patriarchal man. And so I think I've seen both sides, and
Both
so I
sides.
think it's a mindset. It's a mindset.
That brings me to this other point, which is often, especially in our field, and in most other fields, and you actually posted about this, but from a different context. But your post was basically about log kya kahenge, like this whole thing of what will people say. And I think that sits like that's a huge part of Indian society, and I think it affects men and women. So I'm not going to say it's specific to women, but I really think it's a monkey on our backs in a big way,
Yes. Oh, big way.
so much more so
Especially
than
if you
men.
are. I'm a mother. I have a daughter who was quite young when I started going into field, and it was so crazy. I struggled with it. The first few years, the kind of pushback I got, both from women and from men, about why I was spending so much time outside the house and away from the kid, and who's going to bring up the kid, as if my husband didn't even exist. He was very much there, and we used to take turns traveling, and he would travel, but never get asked that question. And so, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that that I faced just because of my choices, right? Of where and how I was going to conduct business and my work. And so, yes, it's crazy. You get a lot of that. It's not changed much. I still get snide remarks from both sexes. I get it's um it's a struggle. It's a struggle, and also because you do, I mean, at least I had a kid, and I needed to be there for her, and I needed to also balance the fact that I wanted to, be at a certain place in a particular season. And so again, I think it was really lucky that I had that my spouse is somebody who was willing to work with me to make that happen, and not just kind of say, oh, no, 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 you have got to be at home and I've got to go somewhere else, and so on. So it was he was willing to also pull, his weight around the house and so on. So that
And
helped.
that's really it, right? Because it's when we look at it from that perspective, it is also his child. It is also his
Yeah,
home. It shouldn't be something that is seen as, oh wow, your husband stays home to look after them, how wonderful, or
I got
oh, your
that.
husband cooks, how fantastic. When is the
I
last
got
time
that a
someone said
lot.
you stayed home to look after your child? How wonderful. No, it's like, so
Never.
why should it be this amazing thing a man does? Like, I mean, isn't that child half his? Isn't the
By the
house
way,
half his? Aren't
exactly.
those
And I
spaces
got
his?
so much because I would not be there for some parent teacher meetings and my husband would be there. Oh my God, he would be the only man attending these parent teacher meetings. So all the other mothers would message me saying, "Oh, it's Sanat again. How nice to see a father who's so." I was like, "Wait, what?" You know?
What exactly?
Yeah.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
but I think the worst
And
was, of course,
yeah,
sorry, the worst was, of course,
no,
women like us who who would also make remarks. They're educated, they are working women, but they would also make, you know, remarks.
yeah.
And
That's
probably,
that's
Swati,
exactly that internalized bias I'm talking about. That's
yeah,
exactly it.
but
It's kind of like being Indian and brown skinned and still being colorist, like being obsessed with who is fair or who is dark, because
correct.
it's a kind of internalized bias brought in by colonialism and various other aspects.
Interestingly, though, they would not have issues with people in corporate life traveling. I think it's because I was a freelancer and I was not working a, a very, normal job, normal, quote unquote, normal job.
Yeah,
Um, it's
yeah,
I got a lot of it. I got a lot of that. But my friends who would
yeah,
be corporate people traveling on corporate work to Delhi, UK, this, that, and several times a
yeah.
week and so on,
That's
and
different.
also mums, never got those questions. Wow, she manages everything so well. Wow, she travels so much. Whereas I was like, oh, you travel so much, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But
So yeah,
I've seen a lot of professional level women, corporate and otherwise, whether you're doctor, lawyer. I've seen the one thing they do get asked a lot is, which the male counterpart never gets asked, is how do you manage home and career? I mean, women sports person are asked these questions, women actors are asked these questions, women in general are asked these questions. When
yep,
is the last
yep.
time a man is ever asked how he manages home and career? And so the other thing with women, coming to women, and we're talking about these kind of, and these are, it may sound trivial, but these are annoying things and they sit on your shoulders. And these are things that hold a lot of women back.
Back.
If you don't
Exactly.
have the support
Exactly.
again, that you need
Exactly.
to do it. And then, of course, there is the scrutiny of how you look, how you present yourself. I don't know if you have faced that a lot.
I don't know if I have gotten that, Swati, because I think I have self-censored myself in the sense that when I go out into field, I make sure I actually dress pretty androgynously. I'm wearing a shirt
Yeah.
and a pant and a jacket and I'm just completely it's and maybe I just subconsciously am doing that to myself, that I'm making sure that I don't stand out, you know. And unfortunately, I mean, not fortunately, unfortunately, there's really nothing to that. I'm tall. I have so
Yeah.
I'm taller than the average Indian height, and so unfortunately I do stand out, I guess, when I go in places just because I'm tall. And so I
Yeah.
try to shrink myself, and that, I think, is a thing again that women do. We shrink ourselves
Yeah.
to fit into places. We shrink ourselves to not come across as somebody who knows something about something. We dumb ourselves down. And I have found myself only in the last year or two being able to stand up and actually say things. Earlier, I used to say, oh, you know what? I will be called this. I will be called that. Maybe people will think this. Maybe people will think that. That's why that "Log Kya Kahenge" post also came up.
Yeah.
Where earlier,
Yeah.
that dictated a lot of how I presented myself and what I did, you know? So that one was a big one, and it used to directly contribute to an syndrome that I had. I had a huge imposter syndrome.
I think from what you said, it's really important when you look at it because so much of this kind of scrutiny, judgment, analysis, what is conventional, I think a lot of women self-censor themselves. So there's so much of that
Yeah,
self-censorship that goes on as you spoke about. And I think that that's why women like you and others who are difficult women are such extraordinary role models and show people that there are ways and means in which to do this. And what's also interesting is I've spoken to you, and prior to that I spoke to Akanksha and I spoke to Dia, and what's interesting is all of you also have families. So it's not like I'm speaking to a woman who is, all by herself and literally has no one else to answer to or answer for and can just step out and do what she does. I read in a book somewhere that I can't remember the book, and I'm going to paraphrase what I read, but it really says that women should be like the mountain, take up space so beautifully. So,
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like that's really
yeah.
how it should be. And yeah, so, take up space, Aarti. Stand tall in your height and take up
So
space.
that's the thing, right? I mean, but it took me a while to get here, Swati. So it's only been in the last 1.5, 2 years. And this is something that I want to explore through writing to understand how I got here, because I used to have a huge imposter syndrome, right? And it was partly this. It was this kind of self-censorship and shrinking myself and trying to say, oh, you know what, maybe I'll be wrong. Who am I to say this? Who am I to be here? Blah blah blah. And it's only been in the last year and a half that I've been able to actually own my mistakes, own my accomplishments, or anything at all, to be able to stand in my own space and claim my space. It's not, it's been a long time coming. I'm not young. It's been a long time coming, and partly because of this constantly being, whittled down to size in some way or the other. And maybe the more sensitive among us pick up more cues than the less sensitive. And so, it's been that hard, but it's been, and I think that is something I want to explore, and maybe even through this journaling that I'm doing pretty much in public spaces, in a way again to, not be vulnerable, or to be vulnerable and be okay with being vulnerable. And I think I want to explore that of how I could, or how I'm beginning to be able to come out of that kind of cage that I had put for myself. Yes, maybe people said things. Yes, maybe, but I know that I had it in me to not listen, to be difficult. But it's only recently that I have started to be really difficult, and enjoying it, because it gives you a certain
Yeah.
freedom, that you're difficult, and you're fine being difficult.
Yeah.
You're not afraid of being unpopular. You're not afraid of being dismissed. All of that. It's been a journey.
Yeah, because it's one journey. You get this one shot, and what is the point of it if you don't live it to your
Yes,
full
absolutely.
capacity,
Yeah.
capability, and take that journey. So, Aarti, thank you so much for joining us, and keep being difficult for Earth's sake. We need it. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, Swati. Thanks for a wonderful conversation.
Joining me next week is Christina Mittermeier, the first wildlife woman photographer on Instagram to reach 1 million followers.
started investigating the work of some of the photographers that I admired, people like Nick Nichols, who had just finished doing the mega transit, and he had walked 2,000 miles following the trails in the forest made by elephants. And then he took those pictures to the president of Gabon, and he advocated for the creation of protected areas. And sure enough, they created 13 new national parks. And I thought, you can use this photography as a tool for activism.